A couple of years ago, I interviewed Dr. Joy Kong, a triple board-certified physician who specializes in stem cell and peptide injections. I was so fascinated with Dr. Kong's knowledge, especially regarding peptides, that I ended up making an online appointment with her after our interview. During my appointment with Dr. Kong, I learned even more about peptides than I already had in our interview. And Dr. Kong ended up prescribing some specific peptides for me, hoping to address a couple of ailments I had at the time. One of those ailments was chronic neck pain after having broken my neck in a bicycle accident about 14 years ago, as well as a chronic hamstring tendonitis in my right hamstring, which was a result of tearing my hamstring in the same bicycle accident. To address and hopefully heal these chronic conditions, Dr. Kong prescribed 3 different peptides: BPC 157, TB500, and GHK-cu, also known as copper peptide. She also prescribed a couple other peptides for me to address other conditions. But in this video, I want to talk about the 3 peptides I just mentioned, since those are the ones I just recently started using again. Now, I will go into detail about what each of these peptides is said to do, how these peptides are administered, and most importantly, if they actually ended up working for me. But first, let's take a look at what injectable peptides actually are. We know from skincare that peptides, which are made up of a short chain of amino acids, can act as signaling molecules, communicating with cells to trigger specific biological responses. When peptides are injected into the body, they can influence various bodily functions, including hormone regulation, tissue repair, skin health, muscle growth and fat loss, and even immune system support. An example of a peptide we have probably all heard of at this point is semaglutide, also known as Ozempic, which is classified as a GLP-1 receptor agonist, originally used to manage type 2 diabetes, and more recently used for weight loss, even in the absence of type 2 diabetes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Kong prescribed several different peptides for me. But the ones I want to focus on for this video are BPC 157, TB500, and GHK-cu peptide. These 3 peptides can be prescribed and used separately, but they are often used together as they seem to complement each other nicely. But before I go into detail about what each of these peptides is said to do, and again, more importantly, whether they ended up working for me, I have to give you a little disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, and peptides should only be considered under the guidance of a qualified healthcare professional who can assess individual needs and risks. While these peptides can be bought from certain websites, which claim to sell them for research purposes only, it is best to get them prescribed and dispensed from a licensed healthcare professional. All right, with this disclaimer out of the way, let's take a look at what each of these peptides are and what they are said to do. Starting with BPC 157, which stands for Body Protecting Compound 157. BPC 157 was originally isolated from human gastric juice, but is now a synthetically formulated peptide consisting of 15 amino acids. BPC 157 has been shown to promote wound healing and protect against tissue damage in animal studies. It is also speculated to have anti-inflammatory and cytoprotective effects, potentially benefiting conditions like gastric ulcers and inflammatory bowel disease. Lastly, some research suggests that BPC 157 may enhance bone and tendon healing, improve brain function after injury, and reduce bleeding. Now, BPC 157 is not currently approved by the FDA or other major regulatory agencies for medical use. So, in a nutshell, There are some promising animal studies on BPC 157, as well as a handful of small human studies. But at this point, BPC 157 is considered an experimental drug. Interestingly, BPC 157 has been banned by the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, as a performance-enhancing drug, and athletes who use BPC 157 may face sanctions and penalties. So that is BPC 157. Let's take a look at TB500. TB500 is a synthetic peptide derived from thymosin beta-4, a naturally occurring protein found in virtually all human and animal cells. TB500 is primarily known for its potential healing and regenerative properties, particularly in supporting tissue repair and recovery. Just like BPC 157, TB500 is not FDA approved and it is banned by the WADA. And again, just like with BPC 157, most research on TB500 comes from studies on cells or animal subjects. However, there have been some successful human trials for TB4 in areas such as heart health, eye dryness and ocular discomfort, as well as wound healing. But TB500 itself has not been extensively studied in human clinical trials, and its safety in humans has not been established. And lastly, let's take a look at GHK-cu, also known as copper peptide, which is a peptide many of us are familiar with in skincare. Copper peptide is a naturally occurring peptide complex in the body composed of the amino acids glycine, histidine, and lysine combined with a copper ion. It is recognized for its potential benefits in skin and hair health, including wound healing, anti-aging, and anti-inflammatory properties. Just like BPC 157 and TB500, GHK-cu is not FDA approved as a medication. It is currently classified as a research chemical. As you may have noticed, what these three peptides have in common, aside from not being FDA approved for medical use, is that they are all said to have great healing properties, especially when it comes to tissue healing and regeneration, which is probably why Dr. Kong prescribed these three peptides to me in the first place, to help heal my chronic neck and hamstring pain. As far as administration, usually these kind of peptides are injected subcutaneously, very much like insulin injections. But BPC 157 does also come in capsules. However, it is said that BPC 157 works differently when ingested than injected. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Dr. Kong originally prescribed these three peptides to me a couple of years ago. Back then, I used these peptides for a period of time. Unfortunately, I can't quite remember for how long. I want to say about 4 or 5 months. I then discontinued use and just recently started using all three peptides again. And I will talk about why in a second. But originally, these three peptides were prescribed to me to help assist healing a chronic hamstring tendonitis as well as chronic neck pain, both injuries sustained in a bicycle accident over a decade ago. Now, before starting on these peptides, I had done and was still doing my share of physical therapy for both my neck as well as my hamstring. And I even tried some alternative treatments, such as PRP and stem cell injections. And while the pain in both my neck and my hamstring had lessened significantly from what it had been right after the accident, there was a constant nagging underlying pain in both I couldn't seem to get rid of, no matter what I tried. And honestly, I had sort of gotten used to living with this chronic underlying pain. But at some point, I re-injured my hamstring, and this chronic nagging underlying pain turned into a acute pain, impossible to ignore. So shortly after re-injuring my hamstring, I had my consultation with Dr. Kong. By the way, if you're hearing something in the background, I have been in my lab. So shortly after re-injuring my hamstring, I had my consultation with Dr. Kong, and I started using BPC 157, TB500, and GHK-cu. As I mentioned earlier, these peptides are usually injected subcutaneously. So every morning I drew up my peptides and injected myself into my belly. I'm not going to show you how I inject myself because YouTube doesn't like me showing those sort of things. But as I mentioned earlier, these injections are very much like insulin injections. Now, while I was injecting myself with these peptides every morning, honestly, I wasn't expecting much to happen since I had lived with chronic pain for over a decade. However, within a couple of weeks of starting on these peptides, the acute pain I started feeling after re-injuring my hamstring went away. Within a few more weeks, the chronic pain I had felt in my hamstring for over a decade completely went away. Now, I have to say here that I wasn't just injecting peptides. On top of using these 3 peptides, I was still continuing with what I call my physical therapy, meaning focusing on working out imbalances, as well as focusing on flexibility and mobility. And I was also using red light therapy. However, I had done all of those things for the past decade. And while, as I mentioned earlier, my neck and hamstring pain had lessened greatly from what it had been right after the accident, because of doing all of these things, I still, for the past decade, had this chronic nagging hamstring pain I couldn't get rid of no matter what I tried. And suddenly it was completely gone, and knock on wood, it has not returned. Now, unfortunately, these peptides weren't so helpful in addressing my chronic neck pain. And I can only imagine that being due to my neck pain not necessarily being caused by tissue damage, which again, these 3 peptides are said to address beautifully. But I have a double neck fusion, meaning 2 of my vertebrae are fused together, and I have a titanium plate right here. So my chronic neck pain is not due to tissue damage, but due to a structural abnormality. But I am glad that at least I was able to heal my chronic hamstring tendinitis. However, and just recently, so this chronic hamstring tendinitis, which I had for the past decade or so, had been in my right hamstring. Just recently, about 3 months ago, I injured my left hamstring. I have no idea what I did, but the pain in my left hamstring when I injured it was the exact same as in my right hamstring when I re-injured it a couple of years ago. Now, honestly, at first I didn't even think of peptides. I just started doing what I knew how to do, which is, again, focusing on working out imbalances, as well as focusing on flexibility and mobility. And I also started using red light therapy. And while all of those things helped slightly, unfortunately, my left hamstring didn't recover as quickly as I was hoping. If you've ever had a hamstring injury, they can be stubborn. So eventually, I got another prescription for BPC 157, TB500, and GHK-cu. And again, every morning, I started drawing up my peptides and injecting them into my belly. And just like the first time around, within about 2 weeks, the acute hamstring pain I was now feeling in my left hamstring lessened dramatically. So much so that, unfortunately, I became a bit cocky and re-injured it by overstretching it. I love stretching my hamstrings by doing the splits, and I usually have 0 problems doing so. But with this injury, I had to definitely back off a bit. I still stretch, but very carefully. I still do all my physical therapy, again, meaning I focus on balancing out imbalances, and I focus on flexibility and mobility. And doing these things, combined with using BPC 157, TB500, and copper peptides, my hamstring is getting better on a daily basis, and hopefully very soon it will be 100%. I will keep you posted. But in a nutshell, for me personally, this combination of peptides, BPC 157, TB500, and copper peptides, has been quite beneficial as far as tissue healing. Unfortunately, this combination of peptides didn't do much for my chronic neck pain, but again, I believe that is probably because my chronic neck pain is not caused by tissue damage, and this little girl is getting antsy, but by a structural abnormality. But I'm really happy that this combination of peptides has helped me heal my chronic hamstring tendonitis in my right hamstring, which again, I had for over a decade. And so far it is looking really good as far as it helping heal my left hamstring as well. I will keep you posted on that one. But again, please remember, regardless of my quite positive experience with these peptides, at this point, none of these peptides are approved by the FDA for medical use, and if used, they should only be used under the guidance of a licensed healthcare professional. So please don't go online now after watching my video and start ordering peptides willy-nilly and start injecting yourself with them. If you're interested in using peptides, please, again, do it only under the guidance of a licensed healthcare professional. Now, really briefly, this little girl is getting very antsy, but really briefly, this combination of peptides, BPC 157, TB500, and copper peptides, is also said to be quite beneficial as far as skin health and is supposed to give a beautiful glow. Now, that is not why I started using these peptides in the first place. But when I started reusing them just a little while ago, I did take before pictures of my skin, and I just took after pictures as well. I will put them at the end of this video. She's getting really antsy. I will put them at the end of this video, and you can judge for yourself whether there is a difference or not. Personally, I can't see a difference as far as my skin looking any differently from these peptides. But like I said, I will put the pictures right there, and you can judge for yourself. I hope this video was helpful. I would love to know, have you ever used any of these peptides? Are you currently using peptides? If so, if you don't mind sharing your experience, share down below. Any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I always love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here. I am off to the doggy park. Until next time, bye.